Hello, thank you for joining me again. Today we're going to look at repeated functionality on the University of Helsinki's massive open online course. My name is Duncan and I am going to guide you through these projects, these tutorials, hopefully come up with some errors that I can share with you and also show you how to overcome those errors. So let's get started. So today we're going to look at repeating functionality, so that could be looking at loops, but we will wait and see. So the learning objectives today are: you are familiar with loops and know how to create a program that contains one. You know how to use the break command to end a loop's execution. You know how to use continue command to return to the beginning of a loop. You are able to create a program that reads inputs from a user until a specific event is given. For example, the number 0 or the string end, after which the program prints something about the provided inputs. For example, the input count, and in the case of numbers, their sum and average. So it sounds like it's going to be an interesting day. A computer's processor, which specializes in executing commands, is capable of executing, in a modern computer, over 1 billion machine code commands a second. In this section, we'll get used to writing often repeated program code with the help of loops. Let's motivate ourselves to use loops. Below you'll find an example of a program that asks the user for 5 numbers and calculates their sum. It does the job, but not elegantly. What if the program had to read 100 or perhaps 1,000 numbers and print their sum? What if the program had to read 3 numbers only? The problem can be solved with a loop, which keeps track of both the sum and the number of times input has been read. The program that prints the sum of 5 numbers now looks as follows. So here in this top example we've got 5 system outs, S outs. Each one has a variable after it which updates the sum. For this example we've got this while statement. So what we've got here is while true, if number reads is equal to 5, break out of the loop. And then just outside of the if but still within the while loop, we've got a system.out which is prompting the user to input a number. It's updating the sum variable, and then it's also updating the counting variable as well. So this variable will update from 0 to 1 all the way through to 5, and then when it reaches that 5th one, this condition potentially will be no longer true, and it will break out of that while loop and then print the sum of numbers is and the answer. So let's have a look at loops and infinite loops. A loop consists of an expression that determines whether or not the code within the loop should be repeated, along with a block containing the source code to be repeated. A loop takes the following form. So here we've got another example of while loop. So we've got the keyword here, while, lowercase w, and then in between the parentheses, the brackets, we've got some sort of expression that we can use to evaluate a condition. So the content of the block wrapped in the curly braces, so we've got one here and one here. The block can have an unlimited amount of content. We'll use the value true as the loop's expression for now. This way, the loop's execution is always continued when the program arrives at the point that decides whether it should be repeated or not. This happens when the execution of the program first arrives at the loop expression for the first time, and also when it reaches the end of the loop's block. The loop execution proceeds line by line. The following program outputs I can program an infinite number of times. So here we go. We've got while true, system.out.print, I can program, and this will always print out because there's nothing to change this true condition to false. A program that runs infinitely does not end on its own. In NetBeans, it can be shut down by clicking the red button located on the left side of the output window. So let's get our NetBeans open and I will be able to show you what they mean. Excellent, so I will just open a project. There we go. So if I run this, because there's nothing to stop the program, it's just going to be waiting for the user to enter an input, we can actually end it using this square button there, or we could have ended it using that square button there. So let's just run that again. There we go, so it's just running, waiting for user input, and if it gets stuck you can press this red button when it lights up. So let's get back to the material. So the example below is a program that prints numbers from 1 to 5. Notice how the variable that's used within the loop is defined before the loop. This way the variable can be incremented inside the loop and the change sticks between multiple iterations of the loop. So what they're saying is if this number was inside the while statement, it might behave slightly unexpectedly. So it's best to create the counter outside of the while loop, and then you can update it in the while loop. So here we've got number equals number plus 1. So every time it goes through this loop, 1 will be added to here, and then when it is equal to 5, it will stop. Okay, so there we go. It will print out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the final system out will be ready. Breaking out of loops occurs when the user enters a specific input or whenever a calculation performed in the loop ends in the desired result. These kinds of programs contain both a loop used to define a section to be repeated and also a conditional expression used to check whether or not the condition to exit the loop has been fulfilled. Users can also be asked for input within a loop. The variables that are commonly used in loops, such as scanner readers, are defined before the loop, whereas variables such as the value read from the user that are specific to the loop are defined within it. In the example below, the program asks the user whether to exit the loop or not. If the user inputs the string y, the execution of the program moves to the command following the loop block, after which the execution of the program ends. So here we go, we've got our scanner being defined outside of the loop. While a condition is true, the user is being prompted to exit. We've taken the input and we're saying that if the input is equal to y, then it will break out of the loop, print this message, and then that's it. So if we have a look here, exit no, okay, let's carry on. Exit is y. So here for this example, we've got the scanner which has been defined outside of the while loop, and this condition here is saying that while the condition is true, we can print out this system out. String input, so that's going to be the user's input, and if that input from the user is equal to a lowercase y, it will break out of the loop. If it's not equal to a y, it will carry on printing this. When the condition is finally met, it will then print out ready. So here we've got a sample output, so we've got the system out, exit, and then the prompt y exits, user input in red, no. Then we've got the OK, let's carry on, and then it will repeat the functionality until it gets that y, that lowercase y. Okay, so we have our first challenge here called carry on. So write a program by using the loop example that says shall we carry on until the user inputs the string no. So I'm going to copy that. Let's head over to our NetBeans. Okay, so what we're going to do is create a while loop. So while, and then we're going to need some sort of condition, and inside the condition we're going to put a user input. So what we're basically going to be saying is that while user input does not equal no, we're going to continue looping round. So we know we need a user input, so let's get a string in here. So string input is equal to scanner.next line. And then what we can say is while input dot equals no. So what we've got here is while it does equal, so to make it a not, we need to put the exclamation mark in front. So while it does not equal no, it will keep printing out our s out. Shall we carry on? So let's have a look, give that a run and see what's what, see if that works. Okay, so we've got a fail on that. That's not a problem. Let's just have a quick look at the example they gave us earlier. So they've done theirs different. So they've used while true, and then they've got their question inside there. So let's have a go at rewriting this. So what we'll do is change this to while true, and then let's move the system out, And what we could say is if input dot equals no, then we can break. Let's give that a run and see how we do with that one. Gosh, I'm not quite with it today. Got errors going all over the place. So let's see. Oh, right, okay, so I've put that there and I shouldn't have done. There we go. Let's indent that. So let's have a look at this down here. So we've got these test cases. So shall we carry on? Question should appear 5 times. Now it appeared 1 time. Okay, let's just double check on the repeating functionality. Well, it doesn't say anything about looping specifically for 5 times. Let's give it a run and just see if that's helped. The changes that we've made have made it any better. Okay, so we've got another fail. Let's have a look at the detailed message. It just tells us it timed out. Right, let's have a look and see if we can get this working. So what have we got? When the input was why, yes, yep, sure, no. Shall we carry on? Question should appear 5 times. Now it only appeared once. So let's just quickly whiz back to the bit here. Write a program by using the loop example that asks shall we carry on until the user inputs the string no. So, whoops. Let's just give this a run locally and see what happens. So if we do y, I wonder if they want this inside the loop. So let's stop that, give it a run. So because it was outside the loop, it only printed that prompt once. But in the example on here, every time the answer wasn't a yes, a no, it printed out the prompt again. So I'm just wondering if maybe that's where I've gone wrong. Excellent, that is great. There we go. Okay, so that's now fine. Let's close this one down. Close, and then let's head back to the website and have another look through. So in the previous example, the program reads input of type string from the user. The program can also be implemented with other types of variables. The program below asks numbers from the user until the user inputs 0. So we've got a very similar construct to above. So we've got our scanner. While this is equal to true, it will run these commands. So it'll print out, enter a number, and then if the number is equal to 0, it will break out of the loop and then print out what you requested. So here, or what you input, sorry. So write a program according to the preceding example that asks the user to input values until they input the value 4. Okay, let's head back to our NetBeans and let's open this. Wrong one. Here we are. Okay, so we're going to start our statement with a while loop and say while true. And then we need to open and close our curly braces, and we can put the comments in. So end of while loop. You'll see I'll put them in on lines 15 and 16 as well. So we need a system out, we need our prompt. Whoops. And then in there we're going to put, is it enter number, I think? Let's see, give a number. Sadly not close enough to have been able to pass. So let's pop that in there. And then the next thing we're going to do is an if. No, we're not actually. We're not doing an if next, sorry. The next thing we're going to do is store the user input in an integer. So we can do int in is equal to scanner dot next int. Oops, like that. Now we can do our if. So if in, and we're going to say equals 4, because that's the number they want us to break out on. So let's just go back and double check. Write a program according to the preceding example that asks the user to input values until they input the value 4. Okay, great. So it doesn't seem to print anything out, but it just stops looping. So let's go back here, that's fine. So we can test this ourselves locally, and I think as we progress through we should start, or I should start doing that more often, just to make sure that we are writing code correctly, and just to see really what the how the code reacts, how IDE works, you know, NetBeans, the integrated development environment, and just things like that, just to make sure that you're familiar with the layout and the sorts of exceptions that you can get. So here I've got an exception, and you may have noticed that while I was talking I deleted an extra line. So things like this are really easy mistakes to do and to make, but I think sometimes it's about getting the confidence, or having the confidence to know that, you know what, it's not a problem, we can easily fix it, and just having that sort of confidence in your abilities. So we've got our code running down here on the bottom now, so I'm just going to write a few numbers. There we go, and if we enter 4, there you go, you can see that it stopped running. So I feel quite confident that that should work. So give that a run and see how we do. And we have passed, fantastic. So we're making really good headway with these. Probably won't be long before we're on section 2, looking back and thinking, gosh, I can't believe how much we've done. So let's close this one off. Go back here. So the next section is returning to the start of the loop. When the execution reaches the end of the loop, the execution starts again from the start of the loop. This means that all the commands in the loop have been executed. You can also return to the beginning from other places besides the end with the command continue. When the computer executes the command continue, the execution of the program moves back to the beginning of the loop. The example below demonstrates the use of continue command. The program asks the user to input positive numbers. If the user inputs a negative number or a 0, the program prints the message unfit number, try again, after which the execution returns to the beginning of the loop. In the previous example, the program reads input of type string from the user. Similar programs with different input types are also possible. In the example below, the user is asked for numbers until they input a 0. So similar layout to what we've had before. So while true, we'll print this out, we'll store it in here, and then we're saying if the number is greater than or equal to 0, print this out, continue. So it will skip this line here and just loop all the way back up here and then run through again. The program in the example above is repeated infinitely since the break command used for exiting the loop is not used. To exit the loop, the break command must be added. In the example below, the program is modified in such a way that the user is asked to input positive numbers. If the user inputs a negative number, the program informs them that the number was unfit and returns to the beginning of the loop. If the number was 0, the program exits the loop. So again, very, very similar to what we've been working with above. If number is equal to 0, break, and that will break out of the loop. If the number, is less than 0, it will say unfit number, it will go to continue and then go back to the top of the statement here, the conditional, the while loop, sorry. So let's have a look. What does the program below print? So we have got an int number which is equal to 0, while true number is equal to number plus 1. So basically every time we go through the loop we're adding 1. If number is greater than or equal to 5, break out of the loop. If the number is less than 5, continue. Systemout.print number, and then systemout.print number again. So we can look through this logically. So we can say on the first go through, number is 0, but we're adding 1 here, so it's going to be 1. It's not going to meet this condition. It's still going to be less than 5, so it'll go back round. Number is now equal to 2, so on and so forth. So hopefully, if I put 5 in there, that should be correct, because this condition here is saying that while the number is greater than or equal to 5. So our next challenge is to write a program that asks the user for numbers. If the number is negative, so smaller than a 0, the program prints for the user unsuitable number and asks the user for a new number. If the number is 0, the program exits the loop. If the number is positive, the program prints the number to the power of 2. So again, very similar to this example, but we just need to add in a bit of maths that we did from the previous units. Okay, so I'm going to go into NetBeans and get the Only Positives class open. So onlypositives.java, let's get that open. Excellent, and then we can start to write our code. So I'm just going to pop back to the classroom bit here. I'm going to pinch this. In fact, I'll pinch this one because it's got both the strings in it that we need. Paste those in there. So we're going to need a loop. So we're going to say while true, and then we're going to open our curly braces because that's the start of our while statement. And then we're going to close curly braces just a few lines down, and that is going to be the end of our while statement. The only reason I've got errors is because these are not correctly formatted yet. They're not wrapped in the system out. So if I comment those, the error goes away. Okay, so I am going to pinch this one first. So this will be our user prompt. So I'm going to do s out and then paste that in there. Okay, and I believe the system needed to exit or break if the number equals a 0. So if we haven't done our scanner input yet, anywhere to store our integer. So we can do int in is equal to scanner.nextInt. There we go, and now we can do our if. So if in, our input, is equal to 0, we can break the statement there. And then it was if the number is less than 0. So if in is less than 0, we need a system out, and then we'll put in there unsuitable number. And then we will continue, so it loops back round. And then the last part, I believe, was to print out the answer. If the number is positive, the program prints the number to the power of 2. So we can do system out, just to see if it wants any specific formatting. It doesn't, so that's fine. So what we'll do in here is in times in. Let's give that a run. Let's close this down. Okay, so let's give that a go. So I'm going to run it locally first. We can do some testing on it ourselves before it heads off. So I'm going to do -10 first. That didn't work. So let's stop this. Okay, so the reason that didn't work is because I've got my operand the wrong way around. So if we stop that. Oh, it didn't stop it. There we go. Give that a run this time. Let's do -10. Unsuitable number, that's great. Let's do 3, that's fine. And then when we enter 0, it should exit. Okay. So what I'm going to do is change this to an else if. Let's give that a try. Okay, let's have another whirl. Rather unusually, I have brought the code back to how it was before I put the else if in. It's working, so I'm just going to double check it again. I did have a good look at it, and I couldn't really think of any reason why it wouldn't. How bizarre. So that's working now. So let's give that a run. If anyone did spot what I did wrong, please let me know. Let's give that a run, and hopefully it passes this test. And we can move on to number of numbers by the looks of it. And would you look at that? It worked. Excellent. Let's close that. Oh, what's going on? Why can't I right click? There we go. Right, let's close that. Let's go back to the course. Okay, and oh, that's the one we've done. Let's just give that a refresh as well. Check our points. Let's go around. So in the previous exercise, you made a program that asks the user for numbers. If the user entered a negative number, the program would inform them that the number was unfit, and if the user entered 0, the program would exit eventually. A possible solution to the exercise is following. Oh, well, if I'd realised that, that's great. So it looks like that's exactly the way that we did it. Oh, it's closed. It doesn't matter anyway. So the program could be made by modifying the if statement to another form. In the example below, the conditionals have been combined to replace the separate if statements. There we go, so they did an else if as well. Which of the previous examples was more clear? Let's examine the clarity of the previous programs through an example. Below, the program asks the user for a number. If the number is negative, the user is informed that the number is unfit and the execution of the program goes to the beginning of the loop. If the number is 0, the program exits the loop. In other cases, the program prints the square of the number, i.e. the number itself. So this is the original way they did it. And here, this program can also be done by combining the if statements. In that case, the implementations would be as follows. So here the differences are, we've got our initial if. Instead of a second if, we've got an else if. And then finally, we've got an else as well. So let's examine the previous programs with comments. Before each command, there's a comment that aims to explain what's happening in the program. Below is a program that's written with separate if statements. So we know about our scanner. So the task is to read an input from the user. The task is to repeat the block until the block is executed, and then we know that that finishes off all the way down here. Here, the task is to ask the user for an input. Then we're going to store the number from the input, or read the number from the user. The task is to guard and prevent unfit numbers for further processing. And then here the task is to check if the loop should be exited. What we've got here is the task is to repeat the block until the block is exited. The task is to ask user for an input. The task is to read a number from the user, and here we've got our differences. The purpose of the if-else block, the task is the processing of the number. We notice that it's difficult to define a single clear task for if-else. During the design and implementation of a program, it's desirable to aim for a situation in which every part of the program has a single clear task. This theme repeats through the course. So now we're moving on to calculation with loops. Loops are used in computing for many different things. For example, programs that process indefinite numbers of user-inputted values make use of loops. These kinds of programs typically print out some sort of statistics about the numbers that were read or other inputs after the end of the loop. For the program to print out information from the loop execution after the loop, the information must be saved and modified during the loop. If the variable used to store the data is introduced within a loop, the variable is only available within that loop and nowhere else. So we would say it's only available within the scope of the loop. Let's create a program to count and print out the number of ones entered by the user. Let's first create a non-working version and examine the action of the blocks. So we know about our whiles now, we're quite happy with those hopefully. This is our counter. So the task is to keep count of the number ones. And then we've got a user prompt, so input a number, and then we've told them that entering the number 0 exits. What have we got here? The task is to increase the amount of ones if the user inputs a number. So if number is equal to 1, add 1 to ones. And then the task is to print out the total of ones. This doesn't work because the variable ones has been introduced within the loop. So there is a way around that. We could introduce the variable up here out of the loop, and then that would work perfectly fine. But I'm sure they're going to get to that. So let's see. The previous program does not work because the variable ones is introduced within the loop, and an attempt is made to use it after the loop at the end of the program. The variable only exists inside the loop. The print statement was inside the loop. The program would work, but not in the desired way. So now we've got this example here where the printout is inside the while statement. So every time the user enters a number, it's going to print out this line here at the bottom. So here we've got an example. So the example above works, but not in the way we would have hoped. Below the example output of the program. So here we've got insert a number. The total number of ones is 0, insert a number, and every time it repeats this system out because it's contained within the while loop. If you wish to use a variable after a loop, it needs to be introduced before the loop. So if we quickly skip down here, you can see that they've introduced ones outside of the loop here. So this is the loop, and this is where variable ones has been introduced. In the example below, the program computes the total number of ones inputted. The inputs are read until the user inputs a 0, after which the program prints to the total count of number of ones entered. The program uses variable ones to keep track of the number ones. Below is an example output of the program, so you can see it's a lot clearer than the previous version. Write a program that reads values from the user until they input a 0. After this, the program prints the total number of inputted values. The 0 that's used to exit the loop should not be included in the total number count. So give a number 5, 22, 9, minus 2, number of numbers is equal to 4. Okay, so let's head over to our NetBeans. Get our class opened. Okay, so we're going to need our integer, and remember we're creating our integer outside of the loop now. So I'm going to call mine integer in and say that it's equal to 0. And then I'm going to create our while loop, so while true, and then open and close our curly braces, and then I can put some comments on as well, just so we know where we're up to. So end of loop, end of main. There we go. So we need the prompt, which is give a number, I believe. There we go. So let's copy this. And then we can print that in. Whoops. There we go. We can add our break in if it's a 0. So if in is equal to 0, then we can break like that. And then let's just double check and see what else we need to do. Oh, so we need to count. That's fine. So let's head back here. And I am going to do two things. I'm going to create another integer. So we've got one for our input, like that. And then I'm going to create another one, whoops, to count. Okay. So there are a couple of ways. So I've done our sort of initialization and declaration on two different lines here, but we can actually make this a little bit neater. If we put a comma here, we can do it all on one line like that, which is quite nice. Okay, so we need to store some information in input. So what we can say is input, and remember we don't need to put int before input because we've already declared the data type up here. So we can say input is equal to scanner.nextInt, oops, like that. That's fine. We need something to increase our counter, so we can say count, and then the way they did it is plus equals, or no, what it was count equals count plus 1. Okay, like that. There are other ways that we can do this as well. So we could do count, and then I went right plus equals, so plus equals 1. That's exactly the same thing, just a shorter version. But quite often when we're adding 1, it's easier just to do count plus plus. Okay, so I'll put a note on there. So this adds 1 to count, and below it in comments I'll just put the other ways as well. So we've got count plus equals 1. So this is a different way of adding 1. The good thing about this one is that you can add any number to literally whatever you want. The good thing about this is it's more efficient and shorter length of code than having to write out these longer versions. The other way was to say count is equal to count plus 1. Okay, so again, another way of doing the same thing. So we have got count plus plus, we've got systemout.print give a number, input is equal to the next line. We need to update our count. Oh no, we've done our update counter. Let's just double check and see what else we need to do. So we need to put in a system out number of numbers. So I'm going to pinch that. And then, so we need to go out of our loop for this. So you can see here by my comments, this is the end of our loop. So we need to be within the main method still. So I'm in between the end of my loop and the end of my main. And all I'm going to do here is a system out, and then do number of numbers, put a space in, and then remember this is using concatenation, so because we need to add the variable count to it. Now the problem we've got here, if I just show you, is that our count might be off because it doesn't want to include the number 0. So 2, 3, 4, and 0. So that should be 3 for the first 3 numbers, but we've got 4. So a really simple way to overcome this is add in -1. So let us just wrap this in. Oops, forgot. Oh. There we go. So let's just give this a test and make sure this works. So let's do 1, 2, 3, and 0. There we go. 0. 3. So that's correct. So let's just get rid of that extra space there. Let us give that a run and see how we did. Excellent, and another one passed. So let's OK that. Let's give it a close. Gosh, my computer's getting slow. There we go. Let us head back here, give this one a refresh. Excellent. Number of negative numbers. So write a program that reads values from the user until they input a 0. After this, the program prints the total number of inputted values that are negative. The 0 that's used to exit the loop should not be included in the total number count. Okay. So I once heard that lazy programmers make the best programmers, and that's because they find the easiest way to accomplish a solution. And I'm thinking here we should just copy the code from the previous exercise and then just change a few bits in it, maybe 1 or 2 bits, maybe 1 bit, so it counts negative numbers rather than positive numbers. I know I shouldn't, but let's do it. So let's see, open recent document project. So number of numbers, let's get that open. I'm going to copy this bad lad. Let's grab that, all of that. So when we're copying this, we don't need to copy the end of main bracket here. Okay, because otherwise we'll have 2 closed brackets and it'll cause, in fact I'll show you, but it'll cause an error. So let's go into here. Oops, there we go. Paste that in there, like that. So if I'd copied that extra bracket, you see we get an error. So remember to see where your brackets start and finish. So what I can do is just, if I do that, you can click on one bracket and it will show you the corresponding closed bracket. So for this one, we click up here at the top and it shows that this one is the end. So I can put here, end of main method. And it's always a really good idea to annotate your code anyway, because say for example you don't look at this for a year and then come back to it and you're not as confident with Java, you know, as you used to be perhaps, and you look at this and you think, what on earth was I writing there? That doesn't mean anything to me. So it's always a really, really good idea to comment your code and make sure that you understand it for future, and not just yourself either. When you work in industry, you're going to need to be reading other people's code and they're going to be reading your code. So it's a really good idea to comment properly, just to make sure that it's easy to use in the future. So I said that we can take this one and we can add a section in to make it count negative numbers. So let's have a think about this. So at the moment it is counting all numbers, but we need it to count negative numbers specifically. So what we're going to do is do something with the count. So firstly we're going to need to move it, because if we put our, so I'm thinking of putting it in an if statement, and then I'm going to say if input is less than 0, count plus plus. But if we put our if statement up here, it won't work because we won't get to our system.out or our input. So we're going to need to move this down a bit. So let's cut this. So select it and Control X. Now I'm going to sort my code out a bit. So let's move that up there. And then I am going to put that here. So we've got my lovely comments. I'm going to delete these because we've already got those comments on the previous bit of code. And I'm going to wrap this count plus plus in an if statement. So we're going to say if input is less than 0, oops, then we can do count plus plus. Okay. Gosh, I always get my less than and greater than mixed up. I'm just going to quickly double check and make sure I've got that the right way around, which I have. Excellent. So let's give this a test locally. And let's see what happens. So we've got give a number. So let's just put 2 in. That's fine. So let's do -1, -10, and 0. Number of numbers 0. Okay. So what have we got? So if input is less than 0, count plus plus, but it didn't add anything to our count plus plus. In fact, what it did was it added 1 when we entered a positive number. It took 1 away and then printed 0. So what I may need to do is put a continue in. Let's try that. So the idea here is that if we put the continue in, it will ignore the rest of the code and then start the process again. It will start the while loop again. So let's give this a test. -1. Ah, so it still didn't pick up this. Okay, let's have a think about this. Do you know, I've put the less than and greater than sign the wrong way around again, and I checked it. It's terrible. Sorry, guys. So let's give this a run now. So we've got -10, -20, and 0. Number of numbers is 1. So it's still not quite right. So let's go back and have a look and see what else we can do. Okay, so I've removed the -1, and that now works, but it does make it a bit confusing because last time we had the -1, and that made sure that our count was correct. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open the last project, which was number of numbers, and I'm just going to show you another way that we could have done this without the -1. So let's get rid of that. We can get rid of these extra braces as well, actually. Okay, so what we can say is, let's have a look. Okay, so what we can do, it's again going to be with our count. So we can say if input does not equal 0, and then we can put our count plus plus inside the if. Okay, I'm going to copy these comments down actually as well, because hopefully they'll be useful for someone. So let's put those there. Let's give it a run, just double check it. Make sure it works. So this is going to be, there we go. So there, I entered 2 numbers there, 2 and 3, and it gave the correct amount of numbers there. So that's fine. This is another way that we can do it. And what I'm going to do with this one is the same. So if input is less than 0, count plus plus. I am also going to put in another condition. Okay, so there are going to be 2 ways that I can think we can do this. I'm going to do the simple one first. So what I'm going to say is if input does not equal like that. So if it does not equal 0, count plus plus, and then continue. In fact, we'll just do it this way because this is the nice, easier way. So let's just give this a run, give some negative numbers, make sure that works, perfect. And let's give this a check against the server and see how we did. Well, this is taking a bit long, I'm feeling a bit anxious. And quite rightly, there we go. So, when input was -5, 4, -3, 1 and 0, program should have contained number of negative numbers is 2. Now the output was give a number of numbers 4. Okay, so this is going to be the extra bit that I was talking about. Because we need it only to count negative numbers, we can either add another if statement down in between here to say if number is less than 0, count plus plus, or we can use more conditional expressions here. So what we're going to say is if input does not equal 0 and input is, which way around is it? It's not that way, is it? Yes, it is that way. Then do that. We're going to need to wrap this expression in a couple more brackets, like so. Let's give that a run. Let's give that a test and see what happens. So just giving this a bit more thought, really we don't need to have two comparisons up here. We can just say if input is less than 0, and that should do the job. So if we get rid of the set of each of the brackets, got input is less than 0. Let's try that. So we've got this code working, so if I run it locally, I'll show you here. So we've got -10, -20, -30, and we get the correct amount of numbers. I'll just test it against the server and see what happens. But interestingly though, it's failed. So let's have a look at the detailed message. Program should have contained a number of negative numbers 2. Now the output was give a number. Okay, let's have a look back over the code. So I've had some problems getting this code to work, and I've just had a Maven error pop up. So I've restarted everything, and I'm just running it again to see if on this chance it will work. If not, I'm going to rewrite it my own way and see if we can get it to work a different way. Okay, so it didn't work. So I've rewritten the loop using a do while loop instead of a while loop, and I've managed to get it working this way. So I'm going to give this a run just to show you, and there we go. So like I say, I used a do while loop instead of a while loop, so it runs through this code before evaluating, and I reverted back to the count -1. But other than that, it is pretty much the same. So with that, we can move on to the next part. So let's head back to the course, give that a refresh, and there we are. The program written in the previous exercises have read input from the user and kept track of the count of certain types of numbers. In the next exercises, the requested sum of numbers is not much different. This time, rather than keeping track of the numbers or values entered, you add the numbers entered by the user to the sum. So 5 plus 22 plus 9 minus 2 is a sum of 34. So write a program that reads the numbers from the user until the user inputs a 0. After this, the program will output the sum of the numbers. The number 0 does not need to be added to the sum. Even if it does, it doesn't change the results. Obviously, if you're adding 0 to something, you're not affecting the value. So we need two things. So we need give a number. Oh, let's close this down. And we need sum of numbers. So let's do a system out. Right, so let's begin this sum of numbers exercise. I'm going to copy that and pop it into NetBeans. So that's going to be our user prompt, give a number, and we're going to need somewhere to store that number. So we can do integer, input, we could do plus equals scanner dot next int. So the plus equals will add the value of the scanner to the variable input. So it probably won't like it because I haven't initialized it. If I do initialize it though, that might cause a little problem because we will initialize it to 0. And if it's initialized to 0, it might break out the loop. So let's just have a go and see what happens. So instead of int input down there, we can do int input equals 0, whoops, like that, and then do that. So input is going to be, the value of input is going to be added to the value of the next integer input. And we need an if, don't we? So if input equals 0, oh my days, sorry guys, equals 0, then we will break out of a loop. So let's put our loop in. So while true, there we go. And what we'll do is I'll just add some comments in. So this is the end of loop, end of the while loop, This is the end of the if, end of if. And let's just indent this correctly. So that should all be indented one tab like that. Okay, let's run it and see what happens. So I'm just pressing F6 on the keyboard and that will run the program locally, just in our console down the bottom here. So let's do 67, 23 and 0. Okay, so the 0 doesn't break out the loop. Let's just try 0 again. Okay, so let's close this down. So I've had a bit of a mess around with the code. We've got the two inputs, so we've got one here, which is going to be the one that is updated with the user input. So here we've got in, which is this one, plus equals input, which is this one. In fact, you know what, that's a bad name. I should call that sum, shouldn't I? There we go, sum. So we've got sum that is equal to, or has the addition of the user input added to it. We've got our prompt, we've got our input. If that input is equal to 0, it will break from the loop and it will print out the message sum of numbers plus sum. Otherwise, it will add the input to the current value of sum. So I'll just close that, give it a little run. So again, we'll just run it locally just to make sure it works. So let's do 4, 5, 6 and 0. Sum of numbers 69. Perfect. So let's get that one closed off. Give it a submit, and hopefully it comes back with a pass. Oh, and we've got a fail. So let's see where we went wrong. So we've got the error when input was -5, 4, -3, 1 and 0. Sum of numbers should be -3. Now the print was give a number, sum of numbers -3. So let me just double check back on the here. So we've got give a number and sum of numbers. So interestingly, if we just look at these errors in a bit more detail, it's saying the sum of numbers should be -3. The sum of numbers is being returned as -3. This one, it shows it should be -2. Sum of numbers is -2, and so on. So -15, it is 15. So let's have a think where I could have gone wrong on this one. So the first thing I'm going to try is moving the system out, and I'm going to put that in the main class, in the main method, sorry, but after the end of the while loop. So here we've got our closing bracket, or curly brace, sorry, and the corresponding text. So let's give that a send off and have a little look and see what happens. Okay, so that has failed. I'm going to put my thinking cap back on and see if I can come up with a solution. So I'm wondering if maybe it could be this, because we haven't looked at plus equals yet. So maybe they're looking at something more specific, so like this. So let's give that a run. Actually, what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to change this to integer dot value of scanner dot next line. Let's get rid of that there. Put that on. Let's give that a little run. So we're still failing. Right, okay, let's have a look through the code then, line by line. So we've got our scanner, we've got our integer sum being initialized to 0. While it's true, we will systemout.print give a number. We've got int input equals integer.value of. So we've got int input equals integer.value of scanner.next line, so that's right. We've got our if. Let's take out the else. So we can do this code. We don't really need an else. If it doesn't meet this, it will just logically move to this line. We've got the end of our while loop. And then we've got our sum of numbers plus sum. Right, let's give this a run. Hopefully this one works. So I couldn't really see anything else that perhaps we could look at. Oh my days, it's failed again. I think I've realised what the problem is. So if we flick back here, it says sum of the numbers. Here, I haven't put that in. So let's give that one a run. Keep everything crossed. And we've passed. Finally! Gosh, that took 10 minutes longer than I think it should have done. But hopefully that, again, proves the point why it's quite useful for someone to be making the errors for you, hopefully. So let's close that one and see what we've got next. Make sure we've got that point. God, if we didn't get the point for that one. So sometimes you need to use multiple variables. The example below shows a program which reads numbers from the user until the user writes 0. Then the program prints the number of all positive numbers and negative numbers given, and the percentage of positive numbers from all numbers given. So we've got integer number of positives and integer number of negatives. They've both been set to 0. While true, give a number, and we've given an instruction to the user to use 0 to stop. Int number from user. So if this is our conditional to break out of the loop. If the number from the user is greater than 0, sorry, number of positives is equal to number of positives plus 1. If it's less than 0, it will be adding 1 there. And that's quite useful actually. They've shown you a different way to do it with using an if-else statement, so that's good. And for printing the number of positives, so here we've got the print statement there. And then down here we've got the percentage. So if number of positive plus number of negatives is greater than 0, double percentage positives. So they're using the technique that we used earlier, where they multiply an integer by a double, and that will convert the number into a double. But obviously you need to use the data double type as well. Okay, and then they used a system out with concatenation to print out a percentage. Okay, so write a program that asks the user for input until the user inputs 0. After this, the program prints the amount of numbers inputted and the sum of the numbers. The number 0 does not need to be added to the sum, but adding it to it does not change the results. You need two variables to keep track of the information, one for keeping track of the numbers inputted and the other for keeping track of the sum. Okay, so let's head to our NetBeans and open up the correct, whoops, don't want that open, and open up the correct file. Close those, there we go. Okay, so we're going to need, it's already told us actually, we're going to need two integers. So we can say int, I'm going to call mine count, and one for sum. We're probably going to need to initialize these. So we'll give them a value of 0. There we go. And then we're going to need to create our while loop. So we can say while, oops, that's not indented correctly, there we go, while true. There we are. So I'm going to add the comments on again, so remember that's just a double forward slash which is next to your shift key. So this is the end of the class, this is the end of the main method, and this is the end of the while loop. There we are. Okay, so we're probably going to need a system out to prompt our user, so I don't get any typos. I'm going to copy and paste it this time. That's why I copy and paste it normally. I don't know why I didn't copy and paste it for the last one. And then we are going to need to store our user input. So I'm going to write sum plus equals, oops, wrong way around, plus equals scanner dot next int, like that, and then we're going to need our if. So if sum is equal to 0, we need to break from the loop, and I'm just going to double check the bits here again. So it's the sum and the count. So what we're going to do now is add in some counters. So we're going to do count plus plus. Oh, forgot my semicolon. And we're going to do sum. Oh no, we've got sum plus equals already. Okay. We need two system outs. There we are. And I'm going to copy the values, the string literals for these. So pop that in there, and then concatenate it by adding count on. And let's pop back here, grab this string literal. There we go, and then we need to add on sum. Oops. So let's give that a run. Well, that's a new one. Something in your code happened. The public static void method of class has disappeared. Interesting. Right, I am going to copy this. I'm going to close my NetBeans, minimize everything, and let's run it again and see what happens. The only reason I copied the code was just in case it didn't actually save it. So I close that down too. I suppose not that I needed to. It's recommended to install to improve Java editing experiences and enable compiler. Oh, that's fine, we don't need that. Right, let's have a look. So it did save, that's great. Let's give it a run right off the bat and see what happens. Seems I'm getting some really unusual errors today. Although granted, the previous one was definitely my fault. Okay, I'm just going to tidy my code up a little bit. That looks fine. I'm going to test it locally as well. Interestingly, actually, that box there that just popped up says about setting your main class. So maybe actually that's what we need for it to work. Well, the code doesn't work anyway. Gosh, right, okay. Okay, so I've made a couple of changes to the code. So we've got our variables being declared up here. 2 of them have been initialized. We've got our while loop and our system.out for our prompt. And then we've got a couple of if statements in relation to the user input. So if the input is equal to 0, it breaks out of the while loop. If the input does not equal 0, then this, the value of input is added to sum, and the counter has 1 added to it. So if we give that a run, huzzah! So hopefully I'm off my daft streak and we can get a few more tutorials under our belt. Let's go back to the lessons, make sure we've got our points and see what's next. So write a program that asks the user for input until the user inputs 0. After this, the program prints the average of the numbers. The number 0 does not need to be counted in the average. You may assume that the user inputs at least one number. Okay, so I'm going to pinch this. So we're going to need our while loop, aren't we, and our user input. So let's get our class open. So we can create int input. We can create our while loop. So while true. We can do our system out. Let's put that there. Then I'm going to say that input is equal to scanner.next int. And if we need the averages, we're going to need a sum and we're going to need a count. So let's say sum equals 0, count equals 0. And we can use the same if statements that we used before. So if input equals 0, we're going to break. If input does not equal 0, then what we can do is count plus plus, so that adds 1 to our counter, and then we can say that sum plus equals, whoops, input. Okay, oh, semicolon, there we go. And I'll just add a few comments on. So end of input, end of if. End of if. I find that these comments can be quite useful, particularly if you're closing off a lot of different things at the bottom of the code. So end if, end of if, end of while loop, end of while loop. This is the end of the main method, end of main method, and then the last one is our end of class. Okay, so we've got the end of our while loop. So I'm just going to quickly whiz back to here, and so here we've got a double, which is fine. Better to spot it now. So let's put that in, and then our sum is still going to be the sort of answer that we're reporting. Actually, we're not going to report that, return that. We're going to print out average. So I'm going to create a double called average now. There we are. And we are going to make that equal to 0 for now. And then I'm going to put some maths in. So I'm going to say plus average equals, and it's going to be sum divided by count. Let's give that a whirl locally and see what happens. So we'll do 3 and 0. Oh, actually, let's do 3 and 1. 0. Average of numbers is 2. Okay, so that looks good. Let's give that a submit and see how we get on. Okay, so I've just made a couple of changes to the code. Do you know what? I'm going to get rid of that. There we are. So we've got our integers up here. While it's true, print out. Take the user input. While it doesn't equal 0, or if it doesn't equal 0, break out of the loop. And then here, if it doesn't equal 0, count plus plus, so add 1 to this counter, and then sum has the value of input added to it. And then here we've got our average of numbers. I got rid of the double and just put 1 as a double in there, times sum divided by. And here, if it is specifically equal to 0, so let's see, if no positive number is inputted. Okay, so if no positive number is inputted, the program prints cannot calculate the average. So we can say if count equals 0, cannot calculate the average, something like that. It's returning doubles as well. So it's taking integers as an input and printing out doubles. So very, very similar again to the previous solution. So let's head back to our NetBeans. and get this one started. So we are going to need integers. So we're going to need an input, we're going to need a sum, and potentially, well, and a count as well. Count will need to be initialized. Oops. Sum will need to be initialized as well. Now we can create our while loop. So while true, and then we need our system out. So I'm just going to pop back over here and grab the prompt. Oh, it doesn't have a prompt. Okay. That's fine, so we won't get a prompt then in that case. So we'll just do input is equal to scanner.nextInt, and then we can do if, did it say if it was equal to 0 it needed to exit? Until the user input 0. Okay, so let's do that. So if input equals 0, then we can break from the loop, and then we can put in our addition. So if input is greater than 0, then we can do count plus plus, and we can do sum plus equals input. What else do we need? So we've got those two conditions in. Let's just pop back here. If no positive number is inputted, the program prints cannot calculate the average. So that is going to be outside of our while loop. So I'll put my comment on end of while loop, end of main method. So we're going to need to put that if statement in between here. So we can say if count equals 0, and then let's just pop back and grab the literal so that we don't get that wrong. So I'll copy that, paste that in. Oops, got my system out. There we go. And then the only thing being returned is the value. Okay, so we can do system out. We can get rid of the brackets, not the brackets, sorry, the quotation marks, and we can do 1 times sum divided by count. Okay, let's just tidy that up, get rid of some of the extra space. That's fine. Just move that up a line as well. And what I'm going to do is just quickly read through this just to make sure, let's just close this as well, just to make sure that everything's looking okay, and hopefully this time I should get it first time. Okay, let's give it a run. Excellent, back on track, we got that one first time. So let's OK that and head back to here. So let's give our points a little refresh. Okay, excellent, so that's it for this section. So it looks like under section 3 we're going to be looking at even more loops, which would be good because there are different types of loops. So we've got do while, for loops and do while loops. So it will be good to have a look at different ways of implementing loops, depending on the scenario and depending on how you need the loop to behave and the code to behave. So thank you again for joining me. It has been an interesting one. Apologies for all the mistakes, but I didn't want to edit them out because, again, I think it's reassuring to know that people obviously make mistakes and how to go about rectifying them. So I left them in there. What I'm going to start doing potentially as well is capping the videos at about half an hour. I noticed that a few of my other ones have been in excess of an hour, and I think probably that might be a bit too long. But if you're happy with hour-long videos, let me know and I'll continue to create them. That is not a problem at all. But failing that, I will see you next time for some more loops. Thank you very much.